That woman does not belong at my daughter's wedding. Those are the exact words my mother, Margaret Ravenel Ashworth, said out loud audibly, in a voice calibrated over 4 decades of South Battery Street dinner parties, to project across a crowded room without seeming to a crowd of 206 people, on the front lawn of Boone Hall Plantation in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Saturday in April last year, while she was standing 3 feet from my future mother-in-law, Delia Mae Carrington, on what was supposed to be the morning of my wedding. She said the sentence immediately after slapping Mrs. Carrington across the face, an open palm slap, delivered with the full weight of her right arm, with her 4-strand Mikimoto pearls catching the afternoon sun, in front of the 6-piece string quartet that had been playing the 3rd movement of Vivaldi's Spring, in front of the photographer from Charleston Magazine who had been paid $1,100 to document the day, in front of both families, and in front of me, her younger daughter, the bride, Savannah Ashworth Carrington, who was standing at the top of the grand staircase of the plantation house in a $3,800 Monique Lullier gown that had been taken in by a seamstress at King Street Formals on Monday for a final fitting, and who, from the moment of the slap to the moment 6 minutes later when I made my decision, did not take a single step in the direction of the ceremony arbor. I am going to tell you, in the next 70 minutes, what I decided in those 6 minutes, and I am going to tell you what happened afterward, and I am going to tell you why. 1 year and 5 months later, with my actual wedding photographs now on my refrigerator in a small house on Folly Beach, I am not sorry about any of it. Not the slap, not the decision, not the phone calls that followed, not the letter my mother mailed me 11 weeks later, that I read once and have never read again. I am not sorry. My name is Savannah Ashworth Carrington. My family calls me Van. I am 28 years old. I am an architect at a firm in downtown Charleston called Page Sutherland Page, where I have worked for 3 years. I specialize in historic preservation. I grew up in a house on South Battery Street, the part of Battery with the view of Fort Sumter, that has been in my mother's family, the Ravenels, since 1894. I am the younger daughter of a Charleston family that has been, for 6 generations, in the exact kind of social register that my mother spent 40 years teaching me to take for granted. My older sister, Caroline Coco, is 34, lives in Mount Pleasant, is married to Chadwick Middleton from the Middleton Place Foundation family, has 3 small children, and has, for most of the last decade, been what my mother would call the right kind of Charleston daughter. I have, for most of the last decade, not been. I never attended Chapin's preschool. I was not debuted at Street Cecilia Society in 2015. I refused. I went to the College of Charleston 4 years, in-state tuition, instead of Duke or the University of Virginia, which were the schools my mother had expected. I got my architecture license in 2022. I bought a used Volvo V60 wagon instead of driving the BMW my mother had given me for my 16th birthday, which is still, as of the date I am recording this, parked in the garage at my mother's house, unregistered since 2018. I drink Earl Grey tea instead of sweet tea in the office. I have a small tattoo on the inside of my left wrist, a compass rose, about the size of a dime, that I got in Folly Beach on my 25th birthday, that my mother has never seen, because she has never thought to look. I met Beckett Carrington in 2022, at Spoleto Festival, at a chamber music performance at the Dock Street Theater. He was sitting 3 seats away from me. He asked me, during intermission, whether I was related to the Ashworth who had designed the rear addition to the Nathaniel Russell House. I told him that was my father, Dr. Thomas Ashworth, who had been a cardiothoracic surgeon and had done the renovation as a hobby and had died in a car accident in 2019. Beckett said he was sorry. He said he had admired the renovation. He said he was a lawyer at Rosen Law Firm, where he did injury and real estate work, and that his mother Delia was an ICU nurse at the Medical University of South Carolina and had, in fact, been the nurse who had received my father when he was brought in after the accident. I did not know that until he said it. Delia Carrington had, for the 7 minutes between my father's arrival in the ER and his death, held his hand. She had not known who he was then. She had recognized his name in the obituary the following day. She had mentioned it to Beckett. Beckett had carried the story with him for 3 years, waiting for the occasion to tell me. He told me that, by the way, on the night of our first date. He did not lead with it. He saved it for later. He was, I understood by the end of the evening, the kind of man who understood that certain truths are gifts, and gifts should be handed over at the correct moment. I fell in love with him in about 4 hours. It took him, by his own later account, closer to 6. We were engaged 11 months later. We were scheduled to be married at Boone Hall Plantation at 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon in April last year. At 2:17 that afternoon, 13 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, my mother walked up to Beckett's mother on the front lawn of Boone Hall Plantation, and she slapped her across the face, and she said audibly the sentence I quoted at the beginning of this video. I am going to tell you now how I decided what I decided. I am going to tell you the 6 minutes. Drop a comment, y'all. Tell me where you're watching from. If you have ever, in your life, had to choose between the mother who raised you and the family you were about to marry into, bless your heart. Stay with me. Let me tell you the 6 minutes. I want to start at 6 a.m. because 6 a.m. was the moment I woke up and knew the day had begun and could not be undone. I had not slept well. I had been in the bridal suite at the Charleston Place Hotel on Market Street, which my mother had reserved for me for us, really, Coco and me for 2 nights, Friday and Saturday, at a rate I never asked about because my mother had always handled that portion of the arrangement. Coco had arrived Friday night. She had slept in the second bed in the suite. When I woke up at 6, she was already up, in the sitting room, drinking coffee from a mug she had brought from her house in Mount Pleasant, because Coco does not, as a rule, drink hotel coffee. She looked up when I came out. She said, "Van, hi sugar, you sleep?" I said, "Coco, some, not enough." Coco said, "Van, I called the makeup girl. She'll be here at 8. Mama's bringing breakfast up at 8:30. She said she'd pick up a tray at Buxton Hall." I sat down on the sofa across from her. I looked at her for a moment. Coco, at 34, looked as she always had, perfectly assembled, even at 6:15 in the morning without makeup on. Her hair was pulled back. She was wearing a pale pink cashmere robe. She had, I noticed, a small cut on her left cheek. It was healing. I had not seen the cut before. I said, "Coco, what happened to your face?" Coco touched her cheek. She said, "Van, oh nothing. Chad and I were working in the garden last weekend. I got caught on a rose bush." I did not say anything. Coco looked at me. She looked back down at her coffee. The silence lasted about 6 seconds. Then Coco said, "Van, let's have a good day. Please." I said, "Coco, let's have a good day. I want to tell you just for 1 second what I understood in that silence. I understood, at 6:15 in the morning on the morning of my wedding, that my sister was not okay. I understood that whatever had made the cut on her face was not a rosebush. I understood that she had been hiding it, that Coco, who spent 3 hours a week with a makeup artist in Mount Pleasant, knew perfectly well how to cover a cut on her face, and that if the cut was visible at 6:15 in the morning to me, it was because Coco had, at some point in the previous week, decided to stop covering it. I understood that my sister, the right kind of Charleston daughter, was, in a way my mother had never asked about in 10 years of marriage, living a life that my mother did not want to see. And I understood, in the same silence, that today was not the day I was going to ask Coco about it. Today was my wedding. Today was supposed to be, among other things, the day that I brought my family and Beckett's family together. For the next 40 years of Sunday dinners, I was not, at 6:15 in the morning, going to open a door that Coco had asked me not to open. I made a note to myself to open the door on Monday. I did not get the chance. Everything I am about to tell you happened before Monday. At 8 a.m., the makeup artist arrived. Her name was Tasha Hollings, and she had done the makeup for 21 weddings at Boone Hall Plantation in the previous 3 years. At 8:30, my mother arrived with breakfast, a tray from Buxton Hall with biscuits, country ham, pimento cheese, and sweet tea for Coco and coffee for me. My mother was wearing a lavender silk sheath dress by Carolina Herrera. Her pearls were on, her hair was done. She looked, as she always did at 8:30 in the morning of a significant day, like a woman who had been preparing for the day since 4:30 a.m., because she had been. My mother, my whole life, had treated significant days as projects to be executed to standard. The standard was very high. She did not miss. She kissed me on the cheek. She said, "Van, honey, Mama's here. Let's get you beautiful." I said, "Mama, good morning." She said, "Van, I talked to Delia Carrington this morning. She and her son and her daughter are arriving at Boone Hall at 1. I have arranged for the golf cart to meet them at the parking area and bring them up to the main house. I want to make sure there are no awkward moments between her and the guests." I said, "Mama, Delia is a guest." My mother said, "Of course, honey, of course. I just meant she is not familiar with Boone Hall. I wanted to make sure she was greeted properly, that's all." She turned to Coco. She said, "Coco, sugar, Can you do me a favor? Go downstairs to the hotel concierge. Pick up the package I had delivered last night. It's the favors for the reception, Coco said. Mama, sure. Coco left. When Coco was gone, my mother sat down on the sofa next to me. She said, Van, I want to tell you something. I said, Mama. Okay. She said, Van, I know that yesterday, at the rehearsal dinner, Delia Carrington wore a cardigan. I saw her. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make a scene. But I want you to know, honey, that I am going to have a conversation with her, privately, before the ceremony today. I am going to tell her that at a wedding in Charleston, there are certain expectations of dress. I am going to do it kindly. But I am going to do it. I said, Mama, please don't. My mother said, Van, I am doing it kindly. She is going to be my co-mother-in-law for the next 40 years. I want to start that relationship correctly. I said, Mama. Delia came to the rehearsal dinner from an 11-hour shift in the ICU. She is a nurse. She has been a nurse for 34 years. She does not have the wardrobe of a Charleston woman, because she is not a Charleston woman in the way you mean it. She is a woman from North Charleston who has spent 34 years keeping people alive. She wore a clean cardigan. She was gracious. She complimented the food. She was kind to Coco's children. Please, Mama, please do not say anything to her today. My mother looked at me for about 3 seconds. Her face did not change. Her face, I have come to understand, does not change when she disagrees with you. It stays pleasant. It stays kind. The disagreement is contained somewhere behind her eyes, where you cannot see it, but where it continues to exist, preparing its own response to the world on its own timeline. She said, Van, honey, I hear you. I will be kind. Let me handle this. I said, Mama, I am asking you not to. She said, Van, it's my wedding to pay for. I am paying for it. I am going to make sure it goes correctly. She kissed me on the top of the head. She got up. She went into the bathroom to check her hair. Coco came back with the favors. I said nothing to her about what my mother had just told me. I was 28 years old. I was getting married in 6 hours. I had, in my entire life, asked my mother not to do something perhaps 4 times. All 4 times, she had done it anyway. I had learned, by age 28, that asking my mother not to do something was a formality that I performed for the record, knowing it would not produce a different outcome. I had not yet learned I was 6 hours from learning that the formality had, in fact, run out of uses. That morning in the bridal suite of the Charleston Place Hotel was the last time I ever asked my mother not to do something and expected, even in the back of my own mind, that she would consider it. At 11 a.m., the transport van arrived. The van drove Coco, my mother, and me from Charleston Place to Boone Hall Plantation. The drive takes 25 minutes. None of us spoke for most of it. I looked out the window. Coco did something on her phone. My mother made 3 phone calls to Tasha about timing, to the string quartet about the music order, and to the Boone Hall coordinator about the afternoon tea service in the crisp, efficient voice she used when she was executing a project to standard. We arrived at Boone Hall at 11:28. The plantation house, which dates from 1936, it is not antebellum. The original house had been destroyed, was white and tall and columned, and set at the end of an oak allée that had been planted in 1743. The allée is 3/4 of a mile long. The oaks are draped with Spanish moss. I had known, when I said yes to Boone Hall 7 months earlier, that I was agreeing to be married in a place that was not a neutral setting. A plantation is a place with a history. The history is specifically, and inescapably, a history of enslaved people having been forced to build the wealth that built the house. The brick slave cabins are still standing on the west side of the property. They are preserved. They are part of the tour. I knew all of that. I said yes anyway, because my mother had said yes before I had been asked, and because I was 28, and I was tired, and because I had decided in the tired, compromised way that 28-year-olds decide things that I was going to let this one go. I told myself I would use my own wedding to show that the wedding could be gracious, even in a loaded setting. I told myself Delia Carrington, specifically, would be treated like the most important guest on the property. I told myself that whatever my mother's usual Boone Hall assumptions were, the day would rise above them. I was wrong about that. I was about to be wrong in the most public way I had ever been wrong in my life. At 12:45, I went upstairs to the bridal room on the 2nd floor of the plantation house. Tasha finished my makeup at 1:15. The dress was laid out on a velvet stand by the window. I put it on at 1:30. Coco helped me with the buttons. There were 47 buttons down the back. They took Coco 6 minutes to close. The dress fit. It was beautiful. I looked in the full-length mirror. I thought about my father. I thought about how he would have looked, walking me down the oak allée, in the charcoal morning coat my mother had bought for him in 2014 that he had worn maybe 3 times in his life, and that was now hanging in my mother's hall closet, unworn since his funeral. Uncle Tucker, my father's brother, my mother's brother-in-law, a real estate lawyer from Mount Pleasant who was 62 years old and who, in his own quiet way, had been the father substitute I had leaned on since my father died. Uncle Tucker was going to walk me down the alley instead. He had, at my request, bought his own charcoal morning coat for the occasion. Coco hugged me. She said, "Van, you look exactly right." I said, "Coco, thank you." She said, "Van, I love you." I said, "Coco, I love you too." Coco left to go find her husband Chad downstairs. I was alone in the bridal room for about 11 minutes. I stood at the window. I watched the guests arriving. The guests had been invited at a count of 218. 206 had confirmed. Of those 206, 149 were on my mother's side, the Ashworths, the Ravenel Street, Cecilia Society members, South Battery neighbors, Middleton Place Foundation people, Yeaman's Hall Club members, Tom's colleagues from us. 57 were on Beckett's side, his mother Delia, his sister Thea, his mother's siblings from North Charleston and Somerville, Beckett's law school friends, 2 colleagues from Rosen Law Firm, and a group of women from the Emmanuel AME Church Gospel Choir that Delia had sung with for 21 years. I watched them arrive. I watched Delia arrive, at 12:53, at the wheel of her own Hyundai Sonata, wearing the navy blue Macy's dress I later learned had cost her $119.98 on sale. She had Beckett in the passenger seat. She parked in the guest lot. She and Beckett got out. They walked up the grass from the parking area toward the lawn where the ceremony chairs had been set up. I watched them walk. I watched my mother, from my window 2 floors above, step out of the main house onto the front porch, where the string quartet was setting up. I watched my mother walk down the porch steps onto the lawn. I watched my mother walk across the lawn toward Delia, and I saw, 30 seconds before it happened, that my mother was going to do what she had told me at 8:30 in the morning she was going to do. I did not move from the window. I did not, in the moments between realizing what was about to happen and the slap itself, run down the stairs to stop her. I did not call out. I did not bang on the window. I stood and watched. I have asked myself, in the 1.5 years since, why I did not move. The answer I have arrived at is this. I had been, for 28 years, a daughter who watched her mother do things to other women that I disagreed with and did not stop. I had watched at age 15, and age 17, and age 19, and age 22, and age 25. I had, in every one of those moments, told myself that I was not in a position to intervene, or that it was not my business, or that my mother would not do what she seemed about to do. I had been wrong every time. I was about to be wrong for the last time. I watched. I am going to describe what happened in the next 90 seconds in the most accurate terms I can, because the 90 seconds are the center of this story, and because I have, in the 1.5 years since, replayed them in my mind perhaps 1,000 times. My mother reached Delia Carrington at 2:17 p.m. She approached from Delia's left side. Delia was standing on the grass, about 18 feet from the plantation porch, with Beckett next to her. Delia had extended her hand toward the string quartet leader, who was a man named Cedric Wilkes, to thank him for playing the prelude she had requested for the ceremony, which was, I should say, a hymn her mother had loved, called Abide With Me. Cedric had just agreed to add it to the prelude list. Delia had smiled at him. She had turned. She had seen my mother approaching. Delia extended her hand toward my mother. Delia smiled the careful, warm, 34 years of nursing smile she used with families in ICU waiting rooms. Delia said, in a voice that I later confirmed, from the 3 separate guests who were within earshot and whom I interviewed the following week, Delia said, "Mrs. Ashworth, you must be Margaret. I'm so excited to finally meet you formally. I'm Beckett's mother, Delia. Savannah has told me so." My mother did not extend her hand. My mother's right hand came up from her side. My mother's hand was flat, palm open. My mother's hand, I saw this from the window, and I saw it clearly because my mother's Mikimoto pearls reflected the sun, and the reflection caught my eye at the moment her hand was in motion. My mother's hand struck Delia May Carrington across the left cheek. The slap was not a tap. The slap was a full, open palm strike, delivered with the weight of a 58-year-old Charleston woman's right arm on an exposed cheek, at a distance of about 3 feet. The sound of the slap was audible to me, through a single-pane window on the second floor of the plantation house, 60 feet away. I heard it. Cedric Wilkes, the string quartet leader, stopped playing. The 3 violinists next to him stopped playing. The cellist stopped playing. The violist, who was closest to the slap, stopped with her bow, mid-phrase. The Charleston magazine photographer, who was on the porch taking an establishing shot of the lawn, lowered her camera, and then after a second of paralysis raised it back up and began taking pictures again, because she was a professional and she had been hired to document the day. And the day was now, irrevocably, in the process of being documented, my mother said, into the silence that followed the slap, a silence that was perhaps 1.5 seconds long, and that was the most public silence I have ever witnessed in my life, my mother said, audibly, to Delia Carrington, and to the 206 guests, who had begun to turn their faces toward the commotion. That woman does not belong at my daughter's wedding. Delia did not react for about 3 seconds. She stood where she was. Her left hand came up, slowly, to her left cheek, where my mother had struck her. Beckett, who had been standing 2 feet from his mother Beckett, who had, I am told by my sister-in-law Thea, been about to turn away to greet Cedric when the slap happened, Beckett froze. Beckett's face, I was told later by his friend Corbin, who was 10 feet away, went through the sequence of expressions that a person's face goes through when the central assumption of the day has been broken without warning. Beckett looked at his mother. Beckett looked at my mother. Beckett looked up at the second-floor window of the plantation house, where he knew I was standing, and where he could not see me through the curtain, but where he correctly calculated that I had seen what he had just seen, Delia said, into the silence, and I did not hear this with my own ears, because the window was closed. But I have had the sentence repeated to me by 9 separate guests, who were within earshot, and the sentences are identical, Delia said, in a voice that had no tremor, no shout, and no visible emotion. Ma'am, I am going to give you a moment to apologize. Just one. If you do, I will forget this happened, and we will both be mothers at this wedding. If you do not, we will not be mothers at this wedding. We will be enemies at this wedding. Which would you like? My mother said, and this I also heard, because my mother's projecting voice carried through a closed single-pane window, my mother said, "Excuse me? Who do you think you're?" Delia said, "Ma'am, that's your answer. Thank you for clarifying." Delia turned. Delia walked, steadily and without hurrying, toward Beckett. Beckett met her halfway. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him for approximately 2 seconds, then she straightened up. She turned, with Beckett, and she walked toward the side of the plantation lawn where the Carrington family had been seated in the front 2 rows of the left-hand aisle. She sat down in her seat. She folded her hands in her lap. She kept her head up. Her left cheek, I could see from the window, was turning red. The slap had been hard enough to leave a handprint. The handprint would remain visible for approximately 3 hours, through the photographs, through the lobby reception, through all of what happened next. My mother stood alone on the lawn for about 11 seconds. She did not move. She appeared to be deciding whether to pursue Delia. She did not. She turned, eventually, and she walked up the porch steps and into the plantation house. I heard her enter the main hall below me. I heard her walk up the grand staircase. I heard her heels on the wood. I heard her pass my door, down the second-floor hallway, to a smaller bedroom she had claimed for herself, for post-ceremony preparation. The door to that room closed. I sat down on the small settee by the window of my bridal room. I did not cry. I had not expected to not cry. I had expected, given what I had just seen, to cry. I did not. I sat still. My dress, which had 47 buttons down the back, pressed against the back of the settee. I put my hands in my lap. I looked at them for about 20 seconds. Then I looked up, and I saw that Coco had walked out of the plantation house and was standing on the lawn. Coco had, I understood a few minutes later, come out of the house through the side entrance, which was closer to where Beckett and Delia had been standing. Coco was wearing her bridesmaid dress, a pale sage green silk, which had cost my mother $870 to have made to Coco's measurements. Coco was walking across the lawn, toward Delia, who was seated in the front row on the left-hand aisle with Beckett next to her. Coco reached Delia. Coco knelt down in front of Delia's chair. Coco's sage green dress spread on the grass. Coco was, I realized from the window, positioning herself at a height below Delia's, a posture I knew very well from my mother's junior league training, which taught that when you apologized to a woman who had been wronged in public, you knelt, or you sat lower than her, to make the apology visible to the people watching. Coco took Delia's hand. Coco looked up at Delia. Coco spoke. I could not hear what Coco said. I did not need to. My mother, who had been upstairs in the smaller bedroom, had come to the hallway window to watch. I knew this because I heard the door of the smaller bedroom open, and I heard my mother's footsteps in the hallway, and I heard the window in the hall being opened. My mother called down from the second-floor hallway window, in the same projecting voice she had used on the lawn, Caroline. Coco did not turn around. Coco kept holding Delia's hand. My mother called, louder, Caroline Ashworth, Middleton, come inside. Coco did not turn around. I heard my mother walk back into the smaller bedroom. I heard the door slam not hard, but audibly. The slam traveled through the wooden floors. Coco flinched slightly at the sound. She did not get up. I watched Coco hold Delia's hand for about 40 more seconds. Then Coco stood up. Coco leaned down, kissed Delia on the top of the head, which is an Ashworth family gesture, and which my mother had used to kiss me on the top of the head every morning for 26 years, and then Coco walked, without hurrying, toward the plantation porch steps. Coco came up to my bridal room. Coco knocked, once, on my door. Coco said through the door, Van, let me in. I said, Coco, come in. Coco came in. She closed the door behind her. She sat down on the settee next to me. Coco said, Van Mama slapped Delia. I said, Coco, I saw. Coco said, Van, I'm done. I said, Coco, done with what? Coco said, Van, I've been making excuses for Mama for 10 years, for all the small things, for the things that weren't really slaps, but that were, for Chadwick, for things I'll tell you about later. I've been holding it. I've been holding it for you, even, because I thought if I held it, Mama wouldn't escalate. And then today, she just did it, in front of everybody, in front of the string quartet, in front of the Charleston magazine photographer, and I understood something while I was kneeling down there in the grass. I said, Coco, what did you understand? Coco said, Van, I understood that I have been married to a man whose left hand I am afraid of, for 7 years. And I have been making excuses for that. The same way I have been making excuses for Mama, and the two things are connected. They are the same thing. I have been trained to make excuses. I said, Coco, how bad? Coco said, Van, the cut on my face is from Chad. I covered it all week. I thought about canceling this week. I didn't, because of you. I'm telling you now because I'm done. I'm not going back to Mount Pleasant tonight. I'm leaving Chad. I called an apartment in Sullivan's Island this morning from the concierge desk when I went down for the favors. They have a unit available. I am moving out by Wednesday. The kids are coming with me. I said, Coco. She said, Van, I didn't tell you before, because today was supposed to be your day, and I knew that if I told you, you would try to fix it, and I wanted you to have your wedding, but Mama she made it so there isn't going to be a wedding, isn't there? Not like this. You're going to call it off. I said, Coco, I haven't decided yet. Coco said, Van, I know you, sugar. You've decided. I did not say anything for about 4 seconds. Then I said, Coco, I need 6 minutes. Can you go downstairs, find Uncle Tucker, tell him to be at the base of the staircase in 10 minutes. Tell him to be ready to walk me down the allée if I come down in 10 minutes. And if I don't come down at all, tell him to help you drive home. Coco said, Van, okay, 6 minutes. Coco stood up. She hugged me. She said, Van, I'll love you either way you decide. I said, Coco, I know. Coco left. I was alone in the bridal room. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 2:22 p.m. The ceremony was scheduled for 2:30. I had 6 minutes. I used them. I want to tell you what I thought about in the 6 minutes, because the 6 minutes are the reason I am recording this video, and because the thinking I did in those 6 minutes is the thinking I would recommend to anybody who finds themselves in a similar moment for the rest of their lives. I thought about, first, what my mother had done. I thought about the specific act, the slap, the sentence, the timing, and I thought about what it meant. My mother had, at 2:17 p.m., chosen to humiliate my future mother-in-law in front of 206 guests. She had done this on purpose. She had told me, at 8:30 in the morning, that she was going to do it. I had asked her not to. She had done it anyway. The question in front of me was not whether what she had done was wrong. The question was what I was going to do about it. I thought about the history. I thought about my own life, going back to age 15. which was the first year I could clearly remember my mother doing a version of what she had just done to Delia. At age 15, my mother had refused to invite my closest friend Elliot Hayes, who was black, to my sweet 16. She had explained her refusal by saying, in the careful Charleston language she used when refusing things, that Elliot was not going to be comfortable at this particular event, honey. At age 17, my mother had told me that my high school boyfriend, Mike Peterson, who was white but who attended South Carolina State, a historically black university, on a football scholarship was not our type. At age 19, my mother had boycotted the wedding of my college roommate Leah Gertz, who was Jewish, and had said to me, when I asked why, that Jewish weddings were not how we do things, honey. They're lovely, but they're not us. At age 22, my mother had referred to 3 new neighbors who had moved into a house on South Battery, a couple from Dubai and their 2 daughters, as people who were ruining the street. At age 25, my mother had refused to meet my best friend from graduate school, Joy Okonkwo, at Christmas, and had told me that she had a migraine and had stayed upstairs for the entire duration of Joy's visit. I had, at 15, told myself that my mother was being protective of social conventions. At 17, I had told myself that my mother was being protective of me. At 19, I had told myself that my mother was a generation older and had not caught up. At 22, I had told myself that my mother was just talking. At 25, I had told myself that my mother was struggling with the migraine. Every one of those excuses had been a lie, I told myself. Every one of those excuses was the sound of a daughter making room, in her own mind, for a mother whose behavior she could not otherwise continue to defend. I thought about what it was going to be like to marry into the Carrington family with my mother's behavior unaddressed. I thought about what it was going to be like in year 2, in year 5, in year 10, in year 20. I thought about Beckett and me having children. I thought about those children in 20 years, at age 12 or 14, which is about the age at which children start to understand their grandparents clearly being exposed to my mother's version of Charleston. I thought about those children, at age 15, having a black friend at school whom my mother would, with a very careful smile, tell them was not going to be comfortable at this particular event, honey. I thought about my future children learning that a grandmother who slapped their other grandmother on her wedding day and who had never been asked to apologize was a grandmother whose behavior was, tacitly, family approved. I thought about Delia. I thought about her sitting in the front row on the left-hand aisle, with a visible handprint on her left cheek, with Beckett next to her, with 47 other Carrington and Washington relatives in rows behind her, all of whom had driven from North Charleston and Somerville, and one cousin from Columbia, for a wedding they had understood, correctly, to be a wedding between a Charleston family and a Charleston-adjacent family that was supposed to mark the moment when the 2 families became one. I thought about what I would be saying to Delia if I went through with the ceremony. I would be saying, I saw what happened. I saw my mother slap you. I saw you not get an apology. I am going to marry my son into your family anyway, at this plantation, at the wedding my mother paid for. I am going to walk down the aisle, past your visible handprint on Uncle Tucker's arm. I am going to ignore what happened. I am going to accept the $91,000 my mother spent on this ceremony as the condition of my joining into your family. That is what I would be saying. I was not going to say that. I was not going to say that to Delia Carrington. I was not going to say it to Beckett. I was not going to say it to my future children. I was not going to say it to Coco, who had just told me she was leaving Chad because she had been trained to make excuses. I looked at the clock. It was 2:27. I had 3 minutes left. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I walked to the full-length mirror. I looked at myself. I was 28 years old. I was about to walk down the oak allée of Boone Hall Plantation on the arm of my uncle. I was about to do something that approximately 206 people and my mother were not expecting. I picked up my phone from the nightstand. I sent Beckett a text message. The text message said, Beck, I love you. Don't let anyone tell you I am leaving you. I am not. I need to tell the assembled crowd one thing before we get married. I will tell it in the ceremony. Please stand where you are going to stand. Please trust me. Beckett's reply came back in 11 seconds. The reply was, Savannah, I trust you. I'll be where I'm standing. Come when you're ready. I put the phone down. I walked to the door of the bridal room. I opened it. I walked down the stairs. I walked down the grand staircase of Boone Hall Plantation at 2:31 in the afternoon. Uncle Tucker was waiting at the base of the stairs in his charcoal morning coat with a small bouquet of magnolia blossoms in his hand that he had clipped, I found out later, from a tree in his own front yard in Mount Pleasant that morning. When he saw me coming down the stairs, he stood up straight. He did not say anything. He waited. I reached the bottom of the staircase. I took the magnolia blossoms. I said, "Uncle Tuck, thank you." He said, "Van, what's the call?" I said, "Uncle Tuck, walk me down. I'm going to say something before vows." He said, "Van, I'm with you. Whatever it is." He offered me his right arm. I took it. We walked out the front door of the plantation house. The string quartet, which had been holding, for the previous 11 minutes, since the slap began to play the Pachelbel canon in D, Cedric Wilkes, the leader, started the piece cleanly. The violinists caught it by the 4th measure. The cello came in on the 8th. By the time Uncle Tucker and I reached the top of the porch steps and began our walk down the oak allée, the music was, despite everything that had happened, steady. I want to tell you what the walk down the allée was like, because it was a walk I had been, on and off, imagining since I was about 9 years old. Every Charleston girl imagines her walk down an aisle. I had not specifically imagined Boone Hall. I had, at various ages, imagined Street Phillips Church, Magnolia Plantation, the Pineapple Fountain at Waterfront Park, the courtyard of the Nathaniel Russell House. I had imagined all of them. I had imagined my father walking me down. I had imagined my mother crying in the front row. I had, I will say honestly, imagined, at one point or another, most of the ceremony configurations that a Charleston girl imagines. What I had never imagined was that I would walk down on Uncle Tucker's arm, past my mother sitting alone in the front row to the left of the aisle. My mother had not, during the 11-minute delay, sat down in her original seat. She had come back out of the upstairs bedroom and taken the front row seat reserved for her past my mother, with my sister Coco sitting next to my future mother-in-law Delia on the right-hand aisle, past Beckett standing at the arbor in a navy blue Brooks Brothers suit he had picked up on King Street the previous Friday, past Reverend Preston Palmer in his collar and his small gold cross, with all 206 guests on their feet, with the Pachelbel canon playing, with the handprint on Delia's cheek visible to every guest who looked at her, which was most of them. I walked. Uncle Tucker walked with me. He did not squeeze my arm. He did not whisper anything. He walked. He was the best uncle a woman could have at a wedding she was about to interrupt. We reached the arbor at 2:36. I let go of Uncle Tucker's arm. Uncle Tucker stepped back, as he had been told to do by the officiant at rehearsal, and took his seat next to Coco and Delia, on the right-hand aisle, the Carrington side. I stepped up to the arbor. I stood next to Beckett. I looked at him. Beckett looked at me. His eyes said, "Whatever you're about to do, I'm here." I turned to Reverend Palmer. I said, not loudly, but audibly, "Press, before we begin, I have something I'd like to say to the assembled." Reverend Palmer, who had baptized me at Christ Church Episcopal on Meeting Street in 1997, who had baptized Coco in 1991, who had done my father's funeral in 2019, who had known my mother for 40 years and who had, over those 40 years, watched my mother perform the quiet Charleston version of what she had done on the lawn at 217 perhaps 200 times, at dinner parties and debutante balls and charity luncheons without ever slapping anyone before Reverend Palmer looked at me. He smiled faintly. He said, "Savannah, honey, take your time. There is no church on earth that requires a bride to speak before she is ready." I said, "Press. Thank you." I turned to face the guests. "I want to tell you the words I said, because they were, I have come to understand, the most important words I have said so far in my 29 years on earth. I did not prepare them. I did not write them down. I had, in the 6 minutes in the bridal room, outlined the shape of what I wanted to say. But I had not, in the way my mother would have, rehearsed the phrasing. I delivered them in the moment. They are accurate, I am quoting them now, because the ceremony was being live-streamed to an additional 417 guests who could not attend the in-person event, and because the video of the live stream was archived, and because I watched the archive 6 months later and transcribed what I had said. What I said was, y'all came a long way for this wedding. Most of you drove. Some of you flew. Some of you, on my mother's side, drove from as close as South Battery Street, where the walk to the car took 3 minutes, and the drive to Mount Pleasant took 20. Some of you, on Beckett's side, drove from as far as Columbia and Greenville, and some of you, the gospel choir ladies from Emmanuel AME, took a church van from the east side. I want to thank y'all for coming. I want to thank y'all for the gifts at the gift table. I want to thank y'all for sitting in the sun in April in South Carolina, in the dresses you were asked to wear and the suits you were asked to bring. I want to apologize for what happened 36 minutes ago. I want to tell you something I did not understand until I was sitting in the bridal room upstairs with 6 minutes to think. For 28 years, I have watched my mother, Margaret Ashworth, seated in the front row on the left-hand aisle, in the lavender silk dress, do what she did today to other women in other contexts. I have watched it at dinner parties. I have watched it at charity luncheons. I have watched it at the 324th Street Cecilia Ball in 2018, at the dessert course. I have watched it at my own father's memorial service in 2019, at the reception afterward. I have watched it, and I have, in each case, told myself that she was just being Charleston, that she did not mean it, that a daughter does not correct her mother in public, that you let the older generation be the older generation. I have told myself those things for a long time. Today I understood something I had not understood before. I understood that my mother is not Charleston. Charleston is better than my mother. Charleston has been better than my mother for longer than my mother has been alive. There is a version of Charleston that my mother grew up believing she represented, and that is the version that has, for about 150 years, been the version that demands that certain people do not belong in certain rooms. That version exists. It is not the only version. It is not even the dominant version anymore. It is a version that has survived because families like mine continue to teach it to the next generation, and the next generation continues to practice it because we are too tired, or too privileged, or too unsure to stop. I have been, for most of my 28 years, the version of myself that did not stop. If I marry Beckett Carrington today on this lawn, at this plantation, at the wedding my mother paid for, with Delia Carrington's handprint still visible on her face, I am saying, publicly, that I accept what my mother did at 2:17 p.m. I am saying that the slap was, if not quite acceptable, then at least not enough to alter my day. I am saying that I will teach my future children that grandmothers who slap other grandmothers do not, in our family, face consequences. I am saying that my family is a family where certain women do not belong, and other women do, and that the difference between them is the address of the house they grew up in. I cannot say that. I am not going to. Beckett, I love you. I love your mother. I love your sister Thea, and your Aunt Elaine, and your cousin Reggie, and the entire gospel choir from Emmanuel, AME, that drove out here today. I want to marry you, but I do not want to marry you today, on this lawn, at my mother's wedding. I want to marry you in a smaller place, with different witnesses, on a day my mother has not paid for. If that is still an offer, I would like to take it. I turned to Beckett. Beckett was looking at me. His face, which has throughout my relationship with him been a face I have been able to read in about 3 seconds, was open and steady. He said audibly, "To the arbor and to the front rows and to the string quartet and to the live stream," Beckett said, "Savannah, whenever you're ready, that is always the offer." I said, "Beck, thank you." I turned back to the guests. I said, "Y'all, I know you came a long way. I know this is not what you expected to hear. There is food inside the plantation house. The catering from Husk that my mother arranged has been laid out. Please go in. Please eat. Please take the favors from the gift table. Please keep the flowers if you want them. The string quartet is paid through 5 p.m. and will continue to play. I would like all of you, on both sides, the Ashworth Ravenel side and the Carrington Washington side, I would like all of you to eat the meal that was meant to celebrate the wedding I am not having today, together. The wedding is not happening, but the dinner can. The dinner is, it turns out, the thing my mother did the best work on, and I would hate for it to be wasted. I paused. I looked at my mother in the front row on the left. My mother's face, for the first time in my 28 years, was not composed. My mother's face was still, which is not the same as composed. My mother was, I have come to understand, at 2:39 p.m. on a Saturday in April, watching her younger daughter do something that her older daughter would never have done, and that she had not, in 28 years, seen coming. I said to my mother, directly, so that she could hear me, and so that the live stream could hear me, "Mama, the slap was not the problem. The slap was the sentence. The sentence was that Delia Carrington did not belong here. Delia Carrington is a woman who held my father's hand on the worst day of our family's life, when you were not there, because you had been at a fundraiser at the Gibbs Museum. Delia Carrington is a woman who, for 11 years, raised a son who grew up to love me, who I am going to marry in 12 months somewhere else, and who I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. Delia Carrington belongs at every event in my life, Mama. You are the person in this room today who did not belong. That is what I realized in the 6 minutes upstairs. I am sorry to tell you so publicly. I would have told you privately if you had given me the option." My mother did not respond. My mother sat in the front row. Her hands, which had been in her lap, had moved up to the armrests of the chair, where they were gripping the wood. I said, "Reverend Palmer." He said, "Savannah." I said, "Press, please tell the assembled that there will not be a ceremony. Please tell them that the family thanks them for coming. Please tell them, from me, that the next time we gather together, it will be a smaller group, and it will be on Folly Beach, and I will send announcements when I know the date. Please tell them to go eat." Reverend Palmer turned to the assembled. He said, in his sermon voice, which has for 40 years been one of the best sermon voices in the state of South Carolina, "Ladies and gentlemen, there will not be a wedding ceremony today. The family thanks you for coming. There is food waiting in the plantation hall. Please take what was meant for this occasion and enjoy it on behalf of the bride and groom, who have not, I want to emphasize, ended their engagement. They are in fact still engaged, and they will be married in a different place at a different time, and we wish them well. Please proceed to the hall for the reception. The Lord does not rush weddings. The Lord will provide us with another occasion when the conditions are correct." The string quartet began to play, as planned, the recessional, which was, ironically, the piece my mother had chosen, Trumpet Voluntary, by Jeremiah Clark. The piece had been selected because my mother believed it conveyed, in her words, the dignified joy of a properly executed Charleston wedding. On that particular afternoon, at 2:42 p.m., the piece instead accompanied 206 guests in partial confusion, walking slowly up the lawn toward the plantation house to eat a meal that had been prepared to celebrate a wedding that had just, in front of them, not happened. I did not walk up to the house with them. I walked, instead, down the oak allée toward the parking area. Beckett walked with me. Delia walked with us. She got up from her seat, took my free hand, and walked. Coco walked with us. Uncle Tucker walked with us. Reverend Palmer walked with us for the first 50 feet, then peeled off to go to the reception, because he had an 11 a.m. sermon to prepare for the following morning, and he could not miss the meal. We walked the full 3/4 of a mile down the allée. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. Beckett held my right hand. Delia held my left hand. Coco walked just behind me. Uncle Tucker walked just behind Coco. The Spanish moss moved gently in the oak trees. A few of the guests, the kinder ones, on both sides, stood on the porch of the plantation house and watched us walk. The photographer, the Charleston Magazine photographer, got one photograph of the 5 of us walking away down the allée, which she later sold to a wedding blog called Low Country Bride for $300, and which ran 3 months later with the caption, "The Charleston Wedding That Didn't Happen and the Families That Walked Out Anyway." When we reached the end of the allée, Delia stopped. She turned to me. She said, and this was the first thing she had said to me directly since the slap, and it was the first thing she ever said to me as the woman who was going to be my mother-in-law. Delia said, "Van, sugar, you did the right thing. I want you to know, I would not have asked you to do it. If you had gone through with the ceremony, I would have walked up that aisle next to my son and I would have smiled, and I would have eaten the food, and I would have signed your wedding book, and I would not have said a word. I would have spent the next 40 years being polite to your mother because that is what I do. You have just done something I would not have asked anyone to do. I want you to know I see it. I want you to know I am grateful." I said, "Delia, I did not do it for you. I did it for my future children." Delia said, "Van, that is the right reason. That is how you know you did it right." Beckett drove me home to my apartment on Queen Street that afternoon in his mother's Hyundai Sonata, because I had not brought a car and because my mother had driven the bridal van. He did not stay with me. He dropped me off, with my dress still on but with the train hitched up with a hair tie so it would not drag. And he went home to his mother's house in North Charleston to help her. Coco came home with me. Coco stayed with me in the apartment for the next 4 nights. Coco called her lawyer a woman named Mercer Priolo, who specialized in divorce and domestic violence in Charleston County on Sunday morning. Coco filed for divorce on Tuesday. Coco moved to Sullivan's Island on Wednesday, taking her 3 children with her. Chadwick Middleton did not, as I had feared he might, make any move to prevent the move. He had been, it turned out, so accustomed to Coco absorbing everything without complaint that her departure did not even register as a departure until she was gone for 8 days. By the time he realized, it was done. Uncle Tucker drove my mother home from Boone Hall. Uncle Tucker, from what I have been able to piece together, from both him and from his housekeeper, Mrs. Rutledge, who has been with him for 29 years, did not speak to my mother for the entire drive. He dropped her off at the South Battery house. She went inside. She closed the door. She did not, as far as I know, come out again for 3 days. I want to tell you what happened in the 11 months between the wedding that did not happen at Boone Hall and the wedding that did happen on Folly Beach. Because the 11 months were the months that showed me, over and over, in small and large ways, that the 6 minutes in the bridal room had been the correct 6 minutes. The first week after Boone Hall was the week of the disinheritance. My mother called her lawyer, a man named Benton Huger, whose firm had handled the Ashworth estate planning for 31 years, on the Monday following the wedding, and she instructed him to remove me from her will. Benton called me on Wednesday morning, as a courtesy, because he had known me since I was 9. He said, "Van, your mother has asked me to make the change. I am calling to let you know. The change will take me until Friday to execute. If you have anything you would like me to tell her, or anything you would like me to preserve of your inheritance before the change is final, please let me know by end of business Thursday." I said, "Benton, please tell her I understand her decision. Please tell her I do not wish her to reverse it. Please tell her I am grateful for the 28 years of care she has given me, and I will be grateful for whatever care she is willing to continue to give me from whatever distance she chooses. Please tell her that my door is open, but that I am not going to knock on hers." Benton said, "Van, you sure?" I said, "Benton, I'm sure." Benton said, "Van, for what it's worth, I've been doing estate work in this city for 41 years. The people who change their wills out of anger are almost always the people who regret it in 6 years and can't figure out how to undo it without losing face. Your mother may be in that category. I'm not going to predict, but I want you to know, I have seen this before. It usually softens, eventually." I said, "Benton, I'm not counting on it softening." The change was made. I lost, on Friday afternoon, my share of my mother's estate, which, at the time, was valued at approximately $4.1 million. That was the amount my father had left her in 2019, plus appreciation. My share would have been approximately $2.05 million, minus whatever portion went to Coco, who was named as the primary beneficiary of what remained. I did not mention the change to Beckett. I did not have to. Beckett, when I finally told him 10 days later, said, "Savannah, I am a lawyer at Rosen. I make $140,000 a year. I have savings. You are an architect at Page Sutherland Page. You make $90,000. We are going to be fine. Your mother's money is not a missing piece of our life. It is a missing piece of hers. She is the one who lost it, not us." The second week after Boone Hall was the week of Uncle Tucker's will. Uncle Tucker called me on the following Monday. He said, "Van, come to Mount Pleasant. I need to talk to you at the house." I drove out that evening. Uncle Tucker was on his porch with his wife, my Aunt Bitsy, and his housekeeper, Mrs. Rutledge, was in the kitchen. He poured me a sweet tea. He did not have a plan to poison anyone, which, given my family's history that month, I had briefly considered. He had, instead, a manila folder. Uncle Tucker said, "Van, I am 62 years old. I have been thinking about this since Saturday, and I've decided. I had to come to it on my own time. I went to see Benton Huger this morning. I have disinherited your mother from my will." I said, "Uncle Tuck." He said, "Van, let me finish. My estate, as of this morning, is worth about $6 million. The land down in McClellanville is the bulk of it. The house here in Mount Pleasant is the rest. I had your mother down as the primary beneficiary if Bitsy predeceased me, because we're siblings, and that's what family does. I have changed that. You are now the primary beneficiary. Coco is the secondary. Your mother is not named anywhere in the document." I said, "Uncle Tuck, I don't want you to." Uncle Tucker said, "Van, I am not doing this because I expect you to need it. I am doing this because, for the first time in 40 years, I have watched my sister do something that the 3 generations of Ashworth men before me would have done something about, and that I, for a lot of complicated reasons, have not done something about up until last Saturday. I am doing something about it now. I am doing something about it by rewriting my will. I am not going to speak to her in person about it. I am a 62-year-old real estate lawyer, and I am not a man who gives speeches, but I can sign a document. I have signed it. The change is made. I want you to know." I said, "Uncle Tuck, thank you." He said, "Van, thank yourself. I just finished the thing your grandfather would have started in 1989. I am 60 years late." He kissed me on the forehead. He walked me to my car. Mrs. Rutledge, his housekeeper of 29 years, came out onto the porch as I was getting in. She said, loud enough that I could hear it through the open car window, "Miss Savannah, I want to say one thing. I have been cooking in Charleston houses for 41 years. What you did on Saturday, what you said at the arbor, I am going to tell my daughters about what you said. I am going to tell my granddaughters. You did not do it for me, I know. But I want to thank you anyway, because you did it in front of everyone. And that is the way it has to be done, when it gets done at all." I said, "Mrs. Rutledge, thank you." She said, "Miss Savannah, drive safe." Coco moved to Sullivan's Island with her 3 children on the Wednesday after Boone Hall. Her divorce from Chadwick Middleton was final 9 months later, in January of this year. Chadwick, once Coco left, did not fight. He gave her the Mount Pleasant house in the settlement. He gave her primary custody. He gave her the investment accounts she had brought into the marriage, plus alimony for 10 years at $27,000 a year, which was, for a Middleton place Middleton, a small amount, but was for Coco more than enough. Coco has, in the 14 months since, transformed. I want to say that plainly. The Coco who came to my wedding on Folly Beach 11 months after Boone Hall was not the Coco who had been in the bridal suite at Charleston Place on the morning of Boone Hall. The Coco on Folly Beach was, and I want to be honest about this, because Coco has given me permission to say it, Coco was lighter. Coco was quicker to smile. Coco's cheeks were not, on Folly Beach, covered with makeup that was, I now understand, covering something. Coco has, over the past 14 months, started seeing a therapist. Coco has, over the past 14 months, started having honest Sunday dinners at Sullivan's Island, with her 3 children, and with me, and with Beckett. Coco has, over the past 14 months, decided to go back to school to finish her own master's degree in social work, which she had abandoned in 2015 when she married Chadwick because Chadwick had not wanted her working. My mother has not, so far as I know, attended any of Coco's Sunday dinners at Sullivan's Island. My mother has not, so far as I know, been to the house. My mother, as of the date I am recording this, has spoken to Coco approximately 3 times on the phone about logistical matters related to the Sunday evening visitation schedule the Middleton grandchildren still have with her. The conversations, according to Coco, have been civil and brief. My mother has not apologized. Coco has stopped waiting for her to. I got married to Beckett Carrington on the 12th of March this year, on Folly Beach, at 3 p.m., in front of 40 guests. The ceremony took 18 minutes. The total cost of the wedding, including the officiant fee and a rented white folding chair setup from Skinny Dip Rentals, was $2,200. My dress was a cream-colored linen sheath I bought from a boutique on King Street for $480. Beckett wore the same Brooks Brothers Navy suit he had worn at Boone Hall, because we had not, after Boone Hall, felt like investing in another suit. The officiant was Reverend Preston Palmer, who drove out from Charleston and did not charge us, because he said, I am quoting him, "This is the ceremony I was supposed to have officiated 11 months ago. Y'all are not paying me twice." The matron of honor was Delia Mae Carrington. The maid of honor was Coco. The ring bearer was Coco's middle son Tate, who was 4 years old and who carried the rings down the beach on a small velvet pillow Beckett's sister Thea had sewn for him the previous week. Uncle Tucker walked me down the sand on my right arm. Delia walked down the sand on my left arm, carrying a small bouquet of sea oats she had picked that morning at the end of her street. My mother was not invited. I had, in the weeks before the wedding, talked with Beckett and with Coco and with Delia about whether to invite her. We had, all 4 of us, considered it. We had decided that no, we would not, because an invitation would have required either A, my mother, to publicly apologize to Delia, which she had not done and was not going to do, or B, us to spend the wedding managing my mother's presence, which was a thing I was not going to do at my second attempt at a wedding day. My mother was mailed, as a courtesy, a 1-page announcement card 10 days after the wedding that said, Savannah Ashworth, Carrington, and Beckett Carrington were married on Folly Beach, South Carolina, on the 12th of March, 2025. They are grateful for the good wishes of those who supported them. I mailed it to her myself. I did not include a return address. I did not need to. She knew where I was. She wrote back. The letter came to Beckett's mother's house in North Charleston. I had, in the months after Boone Hall, moved in with Delia, while Beckett and I saved for a down payment, which is a detail I did not see coming, and which was, for the 7 months it lasted, one of the happiest living arrangements of my life, because Delia and I lived quietly in her small ranch-style house with a vegetable garden in the back, And with the Emmanuel AME Gospel Choir ladies stopping by for sweet tea on Saturday afternoons, and I am not going to go into that fully here, but I will say that Delia, in 7 months, taught me more about how to run a household with grace than my mother had taught me in 28 years of junior league indirectness. The letter from my mother arrived on a Thursday morning, 4 weeks after the announcement. It was 1 page. It was in my mother's handwriting. I read it once. I want to tell you, briefly, what it said. Not the whole letter. I am not going to read you the whole letter, but the last paragraph, which is the paragraph I have thought about the most, said this. I understand that I made a mistake at Boone Hall. I do not understand why the mistake cost me what it has cost me. I was trying to protect our family's standing. I have spent my life protecting our family's standing. I do not know what our family's standing is for, if it is not to be protected. If you can explain that to me, I will listen. If you cannot, I will wait. I am your mother. I will always be your mother. I am at home. The house is on South Battery. You know the address. Mama. I did not reply to the letter. I filed it in a small lockbox in my closet, which also contains my father's funeral program, and the Compass Rose tattoo receipt from 2022, and the cream-colored linen wedding dress I wore on Folly Beach. I may, someday, write a reply. I may not. My mother, according to Coco, still lives alone in the South Battery house. My mother, according to Benton Huger, has not altered her will again. My mother, according to my own last attempt at a phone call which I made on Christmas Eve, and which she did not pick up, and which I did not leave a voicemail for, is still, to the best of my knowledge, waiting. I do not know whether I will visit her in the house on South Battery before she dies. I have not decided. I will decide, I think, when my own children, which Beckett and I are trying to have, at the time of this recording, are old enough to begin to understand what a grandmother on the other side of the city would mean to them, if I brought her to meet them. I will consider, at that point, what I am willing to risk. For now, my mother and I are at the distance we are at. It is a distance I can live with. It is, I have come to understand, the distance I needed to create in order to become a person who could be married to Beckett Carrington and raise children in the house we will raise them in. I want to close with what Delia said at the Folly Beach reception, which was held in Delia's backyard, under a tent we rented from Skinny Dip Rentals, with food catered by a woman from the Emmanuel AME choir named Sister Vernell, who made, I want to say, the best shrimp and grits I have eaten in my life. Delia stood up at the reception. She was wearing a cream-colored linen dress that matched mine, which had been, she told me later, an accident. She had bought it at the same boutique 3 weeks earlier, without knowing what mine would look like. Delia had a small glass of sweet tea in her hand. She tapped it with a spoon. The 40 guests turned toward her. Delia said, and I am quoting, because Beckett's sister Thea recorded the speech on her phone, and I have re-watched it 30 or 40 times in the months since. Delia said, when my son brought Savannah home 3 years ago, I met a young woman who I thought was brave. I did not know how brave she was until a year ago, April. I have been a nurse in an ICU at MUSC for 34 years. I have seen fear in a lot of faces. I have never seen a 28-year-old woman stop her own wedding because her mother slapped me on the front lawn. That is not just brave. That is a kind of moral clarity that I have, in my entire career, seen maybe 4 times. And I will tell you all, honestly, the first time I hugged Savannah, 1 year ago today, with the handprint on my left cheek, I knew my son was going to have a good marriage. I knew it then. I know it now. Delia paused. She looked at me. She said, welcome to the family, Van. The family is you. The family is Beckett. The family is Coco and the kids and Tucker and Bitsy and Aunt Elaine and the choir ladies and my cousin Reggie and all of us. The family is not the people who raised us. The family is the people we choose to build with. If we are lucky, some of the people who raised us are also the people we choose to build with. Not all of us are that lucky. Most of us have to choose. You chose. Bless you, sugar. Delia raised her glass. Everybody raised theirs. I did not, until that moment, cry. I cried then. I cried for about 4 minutes. Beckett held my hand. Coco stood behind me, with her own hand on my shoulder. Reverend Palmer, from across the tent, raised his own glass and nodded at me. The 40 guests ate shrimp and grits and drank sweet tea, and I, at 29 years old on Folly Beach, understood, finally, what I had chosen at Boone Hall the year before. I had chosen this. I want to say one last thing, because this is the thing I came on to say. People ask me now, a year and a half later, if I regret stopping that first wedding. I do not. I regret that it had to be stopped. I regret what my mother did. I regret that my father was not alive to walk me down the aisle on either day because I think, and I will believe this until I die, if my father had been alive, my mother would not have had the courage to do what she did. My father was a surgeon. He had seen people. He had seen them in the state where they are trying not to die. He came home from work every day for 32 years, and he told me and Coco and my mother that the people at the hospital came from every neighborhood in the city, and he loved every single one of them, and that is what made him a great cardiothoracic surgeon. My mother forgot that, or she never knew it, or she knew it and decided her own social standing was worth more. Here is what I learned. At 28, in the 6 minutes between a slap and a set of vows, your family of origin is not your family. Your family of origin is the people you started with. The people you choose, those are your family. The woman my mother slapped a year ago is more my mother now than my mother is. That is a sentence that would have been unthinkable to me when I was 15. It is, at 29, the most obvious truth in my life. If you are watching this and you have a mother, or a father, or a grandparent who is doing to the people you love what my mother did to mine, you do not have to accept it. You do not have to marry into it. You do not have to be the inheritor of cruelty just because cruelty raised you. You can walk down an aisle at a smaller venue, with different witnesses, with the family you chose, on a day somebody else paid for, or a day you paid for yourself, and you can build a life that is not your mother's life. That is the option. It has always been the option. Nobody told me, until I figured it out, at the top of a plantation staircase, in a dress I could not afford, with 206 witnesses waiting for me to make the wrong decision. I made the right one. I have made it every day since. Drop a comment, y'all. Tell me about a day you stopped doing what you were raised to do. Tell me the 6 minutes. I'll read every one. Bless your hearts. Thanks for sitting with me.